Something exciting is happening. Many Jews today feel the need for a revitalized Judaism. People are searching for a more vital and authentic mode of Jewish expression, and more than ever we need to shift, not only physically, but spiritually out of exile mode. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
As opposed to the rest of Jewish prayers, why is Kaddish recited in Aramaic?
The reason that we say that it is customary to recite Kaddish in Aramaic is exactly the same reason that the sages in ancient times introduced the practice of, when reading the Torah in the synagogue, the order of the reading was as follows. They would read one verse from the Torah in Hebrew, and then they would read the translation of that verse in the Aramaic translation of the Torah. Why did they do this? For the very simple and obvious reason that most Jews at that time, talking about 2,500 years ago and 2,000 years ago, many Jews did not understand or not fully comprehend the Hebrew language of the Torah, and to really understand what was being read, they needed to hear the translation thereof in Aramaic, which was their vernacular. That was the spoken language that most of them were familiar with. So Aramaic, the translation of anything into Aramaic, was always a function of comprehension. It was always a question of conveying the meaning of something to the masses. And the very same thing is true of the recitation of Kaddish. There is no doubt that Kaddish originally was said in Hebrew and not in Aramaic. This we see very clearly from a number of sources in the Talmud Bavli itself, and I will read a couple of those sources now to prove this point. In Masechet Berachot, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph 3a, it refers to Kaddish, the prayer that is referred to as Kaddish, although more properly, as we have said elsewhere, it should be referred to as Kiddush Hashem. And the famous line of Kaddish, which in Aramaic, Yeheh Shemeh Rabbah Mevorach, is rendered here in the Gemara. This is 4 lines from the bottom of the page. It says, Yeheh Shemeh Hagadol Mevorach, which is a very strange formulation, because these 4 words are a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic. The first 2 words, Yeheh Shemeh, are Aramaic, and Hagadol Mevorach are in Hebrew. So it leaves us a little bit confused, one would think, as to why, as to what language it was actually being said in, Hebrew or Aramaic. The fact is, the very fact that the language here of the Kaddish, as is brought here, is half in Hebrew, already tells us the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is that the Kaddish was said in Hebrew, and this version, in the printed version before us, is slightly censored, slightly tweaked to make it more familiar to the average reader nowadays who's used to hearing it in Aramaic. And the proof of this is very simply what we find in some of the Rishonim, such as the Ravya and the Rokeah and many others, who quote this Gemara, but they quote the version or the text of the Kaddish being quoted in the Gemara here in pure Hebrew. In other words, Amen, Yeheh Shemo Hagadol Mevorach. The word Yeheh can also be considered Hebrew, or Mishnaic Hebrew at least, and Shemo Hagadol Mevorach is all pure Hebrew. So the language of the Kaddish, as it is quoted by the Talmud, is quoted here by the Talmud Bavli, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, the Masechet Berachot, actually is in Hebrew and not in Aramaic. And the Tosafot were also aware of this fact. The Tosafot here relate to the question why Kaddish isn't said in Aramaic, and the answer given by the Tosafot is that it was done so, as I quote from the last words of the Tosafot, Hayu Ameh Ha'arasoth, there were many people, common people amongst the Jews who did not understand Hebrew. V'lo hayu mevinim kulam lashon hakodesh, many did not understand the Hebrew, and it was very important for the Chachamim that the average Jew should understand the import and the message included in this wonderful and this very special and essential prayer called the Kaddish. And therefore they wanted all Jews to understand, therefore they had it recited in Aramaic. Lechach tiknuhu b'lashon targum, shayu akol mevinim shezeh haya lashonam. This is what the Tosafot say in Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, Masechet Berachot, and really they're basing themselves on what it says in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Sotah, which is referring to the reality in Bavel. In other words, it seems that in Bavel, originally the original text of the Kaddish, which was in Hebrew, was modified and translated into Aramaic so that the common people would understand it. This practice apparently began in Bavel. We have another proof elsewhere in the Gemara, in Masechet Berachot, Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, and I'll read that to you now. The Gemara here on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet 21b in Masechet Berachot is discussing the question if one one stops in the middle of one's tefillah, in the middle of Shmoneh Esrei, in order to answer certain parts of tefillah, such as Kiddusha or Kaddish. And the Gemara quotes here the opinion that one does not stop for anything except for Chutz min yeheh shemo hagadol mevorach. Here again, the Kaddish is being quoted in Hebrew. This cannot be an accident. This cannot be a mistake. The reason it is being quoted in Hebrew is because the Kaddish originally was said in Hebrew. That is, these are two proofs that we have from the Talmud Bavli itself, even in the printed versions of the Talmud Bavli, as we have them in the usual editions before us. This is also true if one looks in many more accurate versions and in the Rishonim, as we mentioned. For instance, in the Rif, on this Sugya here in Daf Kaf Aleph, the Rif quotes this Sugya, and he also quotes the Kaddish in those terms, Yeheh Shemo Hagadol Mevorach, in pure Hebrew. All this indicates clearly that Kaddish was originally said in Hebrew. Further proof of this fact can be found from the common practice today throughout the world in all Jewish communities of all backgrounds, Ashkenazi, Sfaradi, Temani, when reading the Torah. Everyone knows that after we complete the reading of the Torah in the Bet Knesset, in the synagogue, we say Kaddish. What many people do not realize is that before we begin reading the Torah, we also say Kaddish. Now, many people may be surprised at what I'm saying because they don't hear Kaddish being said before the reading of the Torah, but the fact of the matter is that they do. They just don't realize what they're hearing. I quote you from Masechet Soferim Perek Yudar Halacha Yud Bet, where it says that when the Torah is taken out in the synagogue, the Hazan has to say as follows, V'od Tzarich Lomar, he has to say as follows, Ala Kol, now listen well to the language, Ala Kol Yitgadel, V'yitkadesh, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'er, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yit'ala, V'yithadeh, V'yitkales, Shemo, Shemelech Melchei HaMelachim, הקדוש ברוך הוא הנכבד והנורא בעולמות שברא, העולם הזה, העולם הבא, כרצונו, וכרצון כל עמו בית ישראל, etc., etc. This language, if you listen carefully, if you understand the words, which simply are basically the content of Kaddish, which we are used to hearing in Aramaic, but here they appear in Hebrew, this is exactly the tefillah of Kaddish recited before the reading of the Torah. The fact is that this Kaddish remains, or was left in this original Hebrew form and was not translated for whatever reason, whereas the usual Kaddish, most of the time when we recite Kaddish, we are used to saying it in the Aramaic. But this proves that originally Kaddish was not in Aramaic but in Hebrew, and that, as the Rishonim explained, that we are to say a form of Kaddish before and after the reading of the Torah, just as we say Kaddish before and after every tefillah. So, to sum up, this Kaddish, this Hebrew version of Kaddish, which is the original version of Kaddish, which is recited by all Jews before the reading of the Torah, at least on Shabbat, this is said in all Jewish communities in slightly varying versions, but the beginning of that section is more or less identical in all the minhagim, all the different rites and practices, Ashkenazi, Temani, etc. They all recite this version, which can be found, the source of which can be found in Masechet Soferim. From this we see clearly that Kaddish was originally not called Kaddish apparently, but Kiddush Hashem, which is the theme and the idea and the message included and encapsulated in this very special tefillah. And because it is the quintessential expression of what the Jewish people are all about, it was important for the Chachamim, for the sages, that all Jews should understand it, and therefore it was translated at some point in history. It was translated into Aramaic. This, of course, raises the question: what about today? When today the opposite is the case. Many Jews who understand Hebrew do not understand Aramaic, and very few Jews understand the original Aramaic fluently, correctly. This is true, and this is why in the Sidur Nusach Eretz Yisrael that we hope to publish in the future, 2 versions of Kaddish will be offered, both the Aramaic version that people are used to and a version in Hebrew, which, as we now know, based on what we've just explained, is not really a translation of Kaddish into Hebrew, but really a reversion to the original form of the Kaddish.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.